Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it anywhere and everywhere. You can even earn money all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works.
Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today.
Then you can go ahead and distribute your podcast to Spotify and anywhere else podcasts are heard.
Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take the conversation with your fans to the next level, Q&A polls are the best way to get them talking.
With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions.
And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. We've been using Spotify for Podcasters, and we highly recommend you give it a try. Download Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters and get started.
Welcome back to That's So Fringy podcast. I'm Bethany.
I'm Kristen.
And I'm Rick.
Okay.
All right. And this is our newest merch, soon to be available to all you fringy friends.
For the listeners in Listenerland, they're clear plastic tumblers that say That's So Fringy. Super exciting.
So
fancy.
If you're feeling fringy, you might as well jump, because we are going to have limited supply. I'm just kidding. I don't know what I'm saying. Is this a commercial? No. I don't know how many we're going to have. I'm pretty much hands off with the merch. So,
yeah, that's kind of a Kristen job.
Yeah, she does good work.
I think
and
they
we
call
let
that
it
shit rolls
happen.
downhill. I'm the shortest.
Yep.
True.
You're definitely downhill.
True.
Wait.
We are bringing you an episode with just the three of us today.
Yes.
And it's going to be a doozy. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
Trigger warning for everybody out there.
We're starting a new series.
Yes, starting a new series. We're going to be talking about false flags. We have quite a few to talk about, but we're going to start heavy today.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll work into the other ones. Today we're going to talk about 9/11, actually. So Kristen and Rick both have done a ton of research on this topic. And I'm kind of like the last one to really believe that this was a false flag. I was like, no way.
Yeah.
There's no way. But here we are.
Mm-hmm.
There is a way. And hopefully we can open your guys' eyes out there. Because again, this is a doozy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do a few different... I know we've talked about false flags before, what they are, and in no way does us questioning the 9/11 narrative diminish the memory of the people that died that day, because people died, people lost family members, people had, PTSD. It was an awful, horrible thing. And I am, on the contrary, I feel like questioning the official narrative and trying to get to the bottom of what happened is actually remembering them in a better way, like, because we're trying to figure out what actually happened. So I feel like it's more like honoring their memory to question these kinds of things. But a lot of people don't, actually, I would say most Americans probably don't think 9/11 was a false flag. I think that most people still believe the narrative.
Yeah.
Rick, do you want to go over really quickly what a false flag is, just to remind people, or in case they haven't listened to our previous episodes?
Yeah. So a false flag is basically, it's an event that happens in time, like several of them have happened in America and all over the world. And this is where there is a group of people that have an agenda. It could be a military, it could be a government, it could be a lot of terrorists, all of the things. And those people that have that agenda will go to great lengths to scare people into using the fear and the terror that comes from that event, the real event that happens. They use the terror and the fear that comes from that, and they use that to then push their political ideals and agendas. And so what typically happens, and this isn't just America, lots of countries do this. What they'll do is they'll put on patches on their military uniforms that are different. So like say Colombia is going to go into invade another country. They would wear maybe a third country's flag on their camouflage, so that they then are hoping that will lure those two people into a war, and they can sit back and just watch the mayhem. They just watch it all go down, and everything goes up in flames, and they just sit back and say, well, that really helped me out because I didn't have to do much work. I just had to set this in motion, and it happened. And so like when we talk about false flags, we're going to talk about 9/11, but we're also going to talk about some school shootings, probably talk about the Vegas shooting. There's a lot of false flags that have happened. A lot of them, and I'll probably sum it up with this, a lot of them involve guns, because taking away the guns of the American people is a very high priority for those that wish to do us harm. And so if you have a well-armed population, which is why our founding fathers made room for it in the Constitution, so that if there was a tyrannical government or people come over and try to take us over, we would have a well-armed population that could take care of that. Well, they're trying to take that away because they are that tyrannical government, and they are trying to take away our guns so that then they can do whatever they want, because we're not going to be able to fight back. And there's lots of countries that have been through this already.
Yeah, Drew, our friend Drew Misson from Missin' the Point podcast, we had him on, and he's in Australia, and they've already rolled all that stuff out there. So it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Yep. So think it through. Don't turn it off just because you heard false flag and 9/11 and you maybe had a very visceral, emotional response, especially if we have any listeners from, New York or other places that are very well connected to this event. We don't by any means want to step on any of those toes or diminish any of those lives lost or anything, as Kristen said before. In fact, we want to find justice for these people. And we're saying tonight that there's some things that don't add up, and we just want to talk about it. And if it doesn't add up and there is another story, then we believe that those people deserve justice and to know the truth. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kristen because she's got pages of notes. She's done a really good job. She's definitely going to be schooling us up tonight, and I'm excited. So let's go.
Okay, so let's start with just kind of the official narrative so that we can lay the groundwork for people. I know we have listeners that are not just in the United States, so I know this is a big thing for the US, but let's lay out the facts. So Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, suicide attackers seized the U.S. passenger jets and crashed them into the two towers, which was called the World Trade Center, killing thousands. 4 planes flying over the eastern United States were simultaneously seized by small teams of hijackers with box cutters. This is the official narrative.
Right.
2 planes struck the 2 towers. One hit the North Tower at 8:46 in the morning, and then one hit the South Tower at 9:03 in the morning. In less than 2 hours from the time the planes hit to when the buildings collapsed was less than 2 hours. They were 110 stories each of those towers. At 9:37, the 3rd plane hit the western face of the Pentagon. And if people don't know what the Pentagon is in charge of, they do like our with like our military industrial complex, like all that stuff goes through the Pentagon.
Yeah,
And
the
that's-
military and all of the, sorry to interrupt, but the military and all of the generals and, the president will have meetings there. They have skiffs where they can talk secretly, stuff like that. And then what were you going to say, Beth?
That's not in New York, correct? That's
Correct.
in DC. So we're talking about two separate locations.
It's actually, I believe, technically in Virginia, but it's just right. It's right there next to Arlington Cemetery.
Okay.
So then the fourth plane crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 10:03 after the passengers were able to seize control of the plane. So it's speculated that the plane was meant for the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., but of course we don't really know what the final destination was. Somehow they were able to get into the cockpit and they basically took the plane and nosedived it into the ground. So the only casualties for that one were the people on the plane. So in all, 2,977 people died. There was 246 passengers and crew between the four flights. There was 2,606 at the World Trade Centers between the two buildings. And then 125 people at the Pentagon. The youngest was 2 years old and the oldest was 82 years old. So that's kind of the official, in a nutshell, what happened.
On top of that, who was responsible for this?
Okay. So let's get into the attackers. So this is still all part of the official narrative. Islamist extremist network called Al-Qaeda planned the attacks from Afghanistan. They were led by Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda blamed the U.S. and its allies for conflicts in the Muslim world. So they basically like death to America.
Right.
19 people carried out the hijackings. There was 3 teams of 5 and 1 team of 4, which was the Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Each group included someone with pilot training, and that training was received in the United States. 15 hijackers were Saudis, like Osama bin Laden. 2 were from the United Arab Emirates, and 1 from Egypt and 1 from Lebanon. What else do you have about the hijackers?
Well, these hijackers came in and they said that they used box knives to get in there. And obviously, we know that things have changed since 9/11 when it comes to TSA and all those things. And we'll get into that because it is involved. But we know that they had these box cutters. And for me, being a military person, stuff like that, I laugh at a box cutter. But, when you're not able to get on a plane with a gun or a knife or anything like that, you don't have much of a chance to fight back to even a box cutter. And so when you don't have anything to a box cutter, that's pretty scary to most people, that don't have any training, that don't have a background in fighting, that maybe have never seen any violence, stuff like that. So you could see how, even though a lot of people say box cutters, come on, like I actually think that part could be kind of believable, because you can do a lot of damage with the box cutter. We'll say
just the shock factor of, people have 3 main, emotions or things that happen in trauma.
Yeah.
You have fight or flight or freeze. Yeah. And most people have heard about fight or flight. You hear about it all the time. I would say the majority of people freeze. It's very, very common for somebody when there's some kind of trauma or tragedy happening to just clam up. They just kind of pop back into their turtle shell and they're like, okay, I'm safe in here. I'm not coming back out. That's just a normal response.
Well, your body's trying to process information. You're like a deer in the headlights, literally. That's what a deer does, is it stops and it's trying to assess the danger, but the danger is so traumatic looking, like there's a truck coming at me and I'm about to die, that it almost doesn't know what to do. It just like stops moving and then it gets hit and dies, and that's the whole mindset behind being a warrior, is trying to untrain that thought, to almost brainwash you into taking that fight or flight mechanism and then making it, a fight raw tipped edge that, even after you get out of the military, you can't do much about. Hard to put the pin cap back on that. So you have to.
And I guess we should preface some of this with, I hope it's okay, Rick, that I'm sharing this, but Rick was obviously in the Marine Corps, and he's one of the few veterans that is a pre 9/11 and a post 9/11. So he went into the military in 2000, and we were not at war. We were at peace. And, he went in for his training, did all of that. And then here comes 2001, and he's been in there for a year, right around a year. And all of a sudden, war smacks him in the face. So and there's not a ton of veterans that fall in that category, but it's a very interesting category that I think a lot of people forget about. He went in and started all of his training and wanted to, fight for his country. Little did he know that in, less than a year, he was going to be literally fighting for his country. So this is a subject that is pretty near and dear to Rick's heart and to my heart, having watched everything he's dealt with, having gone to war. So I want everybody to know we are extremely sensitive to this topic, which is why I think we're so passionate about it too, because there's just a lot of tragedy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so here's some of the...
I have a question.
Yes.
At what point did this official narrative come out? Like, was it right away? How did we know about these hijackers?
Who told us this narrative?
Right.
Yeah, we'll get there.
That is the right question.
Got it. Okay.
So, a lot of it. So, but back then, because we have to kind of rewind our brains here. And some people that are a little bit younger probably don't even really know what the world was like before 9/11, because it was a very different time. I could walk into an airport and literally walk right up to the gate, and I didn't have to have a ticket. I didn't go through security. I didn't nothing until you were getting on your plane. That was the only time you went through security. It was bonkers. Now you can't even get behind security unless you have like an unaccompanied minor or something. And even then, they don't like to let you back there. So but it was not like that. And also, we didn't live in the day and age of Expedia and Orbitz and all these things where you could get flights like that.
Or cell phones. We're talking 2001.
Yeah.
The iPhone didn't even come out till 2007. And so back then we were still using like brick phones, like these Nokias and Motorola's and stuff like that. So, and
it wasn't very long before 2001 that this kind of 24-hour news cycle started, because it used to be the news came on at 5, and that was pretty much it. Once a day when you're sitting down with your grandparents eating dinner and watching the news every night. And then at some point, we morphed into this 24-hour news. But it was still only on like a few channels. There was like Fox News and CNN and, MSNBC. There was like some of the big ones, but the news wasn't as readily available as it is now. You couldn't just pull out your cell phone and fact check somebody, or there was none of that. Whatever they said on the news is what people believed, like hook, line, and sinker. There was not a lot of question the narrative back then, because why would the news say something that wasn't true? It doesn't make sense. They're trying to tell us the news. So
investigative journalism, they're so good at it, and we can't do it because we're dumb.
Right. Well, and back then journalists did used to do investigations. They did used to actually want to know the truth and want to get the truth out there. They weren't handed a script from the CIA that said, here's what you can say. That became a thing I read around this time. Would you say? Is that fair to say, do you think?
Yeah, because the news really started ramping up. I think it was probably a little bit before this, probably around, I'd say the news coverage of like Vietnam was a pretty big deal, right around the moon landing in Vietnam and all that stuff. Like you saw it just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And then you had Desert Storm, Desert Shield. And we're actually now, for the first time in our lives, watching another country get bombed from our couches. And now we can see for the first time the atrocities of war that only our grandpas or our great grandpas have etched in their minds, or our great grandmothers for that matter, because, you know, all of the women that served are incredible. And they have all of this trauma embedded in their mind, but it's only them because they had to go there. There wasn't a lot of TV coverage, and whatever you did get, it got worse and worse and worse. And they were like desensitizing us. You know, you would never see a dead body on TV back in the day. You like never. And then all of a sudden now you're seeing dead bodies on TV, or you're seeing huge explosions and gun battles, and you're just like, and they tell you that that's real life, that's really happening, and they're, you know, you don't know any different because you weren't there. And it's only the ones that actually went to combat that can tell you the real stories. But those that didn't go, they also have been indoctrinated and brainwashed and traumatized by these wars and what they saw that morning on TV, you know, because 9/11 was such a traumatic event for America. I mean, they were saying on the news, it's the next, it's the next Pearl Harbor. That's what they kept saying. It's the next Pearl Harbor, you know. It's like they say these things over and over to stick them in your mind.
It's called programming.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
so this is all still in the vein of the official narrative. So the response from the U.S. after all this, less than a month after the attacks, George W. Bush, who was the president, led an invasion into Afghanistan to hunt down bin Laden and to eradicate Al-Qaeda. That was the mission, was to go into Afghanistan. Somehow we ended up going into Iraq, and who knows? But that's where that was the plan at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
They didn't actually find and kill bin Laden until 2011, and he was in Pakistan. He wasn't even in Afghanistan. The alleged planner of 9/11, who was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was arrested in Pakistan in 2003 and is currently being held at Guantanamo Bay awaiting trial. 2 years later.
So Bush sends our men to war, men and women, a month later.
Less than a month.
Bin Laden is not actually killed for 10 years?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Yep. So the U.S. troops left Afghanistan in 2021 after being there for basically 20 years. We'll get into this later with Rick on why we were there for so long after bin Laden was killed, because that's interesting. Some other legacies of 9/11 things that changed were flight safety, which we kind of touched on. Flight safety was tightened around the world, like went from 0 to 60, kind of like probably the COVID precautions for modern day people. We went from no masks to masks overnight.
Yeah.
So flight safety tightened like that. The TSA, which is the Transportation Security Administration, was created. We didn't even have a TSA before that. I mean, I know that they had some bomb sniffing dogs and maybe some, rudimentary security things at airports, but there was no organized TSA like there is now. It took them more than 8 months to clean up what they called Ground Zero, which is where the 2 towers basically collapsed. Now there is a memorial and a museum that sit there. What's it called? The One World Trade Center?
So, World Trade Center.
Yeah, and it's like one building that's got a black cube weird thing in the middle. It's like 30 stories down or 30 feet down.
Well, it's a black cube that's going into the ground. So
into
it's
the
like
ground.
Inverted black cube where there's water continuously flowing down into it as if it's a pit of sorts.
Ooh, a pit. That's kind of
interesting. Black cube.
It was also called the Freedom Tower. It was completed and it stands 1,776 feet high. The original North Tower, which was the higher of the two, was only 1,368 feet. So this new tower is actually higher than the old ones. Reconstruction at the Pentagon took just under a year. Let's see. They had the staff back in their offices by August of 2002. So that was not even a year.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And they made the decision to invade Iraq in September.
Right.
Like 1 year.
Right. Like you guys were moving by then.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest thing that Rick probably has the best brain on was enacted was the Patriot Act, which was a big piece of legislation that was, I don't even know how many pages it was. It was the biggest piece of legislation that had been handed down. Ever.
It was a giant piece of legislation. And so the Patriot Act was something that they were trying to push through very quickly. It seemed like it just came up all of a sudden. And when it came up so quickly, people were kind of shocked by it. Like, where did this come from? How did you write all of this already?
It was like within a few days, within 4 days, I want to say.
Yeah.
This huge packet of legislature was given over to them.
And it was on a tight deadline. Like it had to be done within the week or it was something ridiculous, 2 weeks. And there was two Democrats that were kind of holding back. They were saying, well, let's wait on this a little bit.
At least let us read through it.
Yeah, we need to read all of this. It's ridiculous for you to think that we can just pass this with, Democrats with a heart. That is possible.
Wait, those
rare.
exist?
It's rare.
I thought those were like possible. Unicorns.
Don't forget, John F. Kennedy was Democrat. So the thing is, when you go to push this legislation so fast, there is a bit of a pushback sometimes, but sometimes not, and so they just kind of push things through. That's how Congress works. They're all in on it together. They have a couple handshakes. We've been seeing how this is happening with the Speaker of the House stuff lately, and the dude pulling the fire alarm to, not get something passed. Like, they're a bunch of snakes. It's called the swamp for a reason. I digress. They're trying to push through this Patriot Act because you have to do it while the populace is frightened, literally scared. Like
we talked about earlier, the fight, flight, or freeze. Like, Americans were still frozen, literally frozen, watching their TV, for a lot of people, it was the first time they were watching the 24-hour news stations. Like, they were happy with Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, but people turned it on and they didn't turn it off because they were frozen for a long time. So they pushed it through so fast. Yeah, totally. They pushed it through so fast that it was actually signed into law by George W. Bush on October 26th, 2001.
October.
Yeah.
20
We're talking
what?
a little
So
over a
6
month
weeks later.
and it was law. That's how fast this thing went through. This thing of legislation that was the biggest packet that they'd ever gotten.
So what exactly
how they got those guys? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what exactly is the Patriot Act?
So it basically expanded surveillance abilities of law enforcement, including by tapping domestic and international phone calls. So that was probably the biggest thing that people will remember about the Patriot Act. But there was also, it was supposed to streamline, make it easier for interagency communication to allow federal agencies to basically more effectively use their resources together. So it was supposed to kind of streamline that process.
How do we keep this from ever happening again? Excuse me.
Right.
That's the official.
So they're saying if the
narrative.
left hand can't talk to the right hand, we have a problem. So we need to fast track all of this. So no, I don't think all of the Patriot Act was bad. I think a lot of it probably was good stuff, but it's that same thing where they still do it today. They want a bond measure passed to build new schools, but they also want this and this and this and this and this.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah,
but you have to
if you
remember
read through this legislation, it's in everything.
You have to remember who you're talking about and what their agenda is. You know,
Right.
what they want and what they got essentially was control of all of our movements through the TSA because they used planes. See, they used planes so that they could scare us and restrict our movements internationally.
Mm-hmm.
You can't leave your country if you don't go through these strict processes and blah, 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 blah. So now they're tracking you with facial recognition. They're looking through all of your bags and everything that you have, all of your privacy. This is unlawful search and seizure. It's in the Constitution. You're not supposed to do that, but they're doing it because we gave them permission, not we, our representatives gave them permission to go through all of our stuff and basically stomp all over the Fourth Amendment? Illegal search and seizure? I think I could be wrong. Yeah, I could flip through it. But so we've given that up. We didn't, they did. And then they get to not only look through our bags and look through all of our stuff and strip search us if they want to, if they've deemed it necessary. They will strip search you or detain you and make you miss your flight, all of those things. But it also gave the NSA full access to all of the smartphones, all of the internet, all of that stuff to track each and every person in real time. So not only that, but then when you put the other piece of the puzzle together where they gave interagency cooperation through faster means, that means now the NSA can share information faster with the CIA and the NSA and the Pentagon and all of these other tentacles that come off of this. They can share all that information faster. And this is what Edward Snowden blew the whistle on. This very thing.
If you haven't watched that movie Snowden, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so another thing that they did during this Patriot Act was they increased the penalties for basically terrorist crimes, and they expanded the list of activities which would qualify for terrorist charges. So seems like a not bad thing. They're making the charges worse for terrorists, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Except that they've got the mastermind for 9/11, who's still in custody and hasn't even been tried for the last 20 years. So there's been no penalties for him. I mean, he's getting 3 meals a day. And anyways.
It's crazy. Yeah, one more thing about the Patriot Act, though, before we move on. I apologize. Okay. But it also gave the president the right now to call for a war, whereas the Constitution states that only Congress can call for a war.
Right.
This Patriot Act now gave George Bush the ability to wage war on every single country that was surrounding Israel. That's right. That's official. That's official, documented. They were going to destroy all of the countries surrounding Israel. That's the catalyst for that.
Right. And their whole reasoning for that was that there's all these tunnels that are connected because geographically all these countries are, side by side. And so they basically just kind of took a broad brush and painted over the whole area and were at liberty to invade any of them. Mm-hmm. So fast forward a little bit, June 1st, 2015, this Patriot Act actually failed to pass Congress on that day. Because people were like, the more they looked into it, I don't know, it doesn't seem right. So I think people had picked it apart by then. So it didn't actually pass. However, on June 2nd, 2015, the U.S. Freedom Act became law and basically reenacted everything that was in the Patriot Act, except it was amended to disallow the NSA to continue its mass phone data collection program. So that was the only thing that changed between the Patriot Act and the Freedom Act.
Wait, what's that act called again?
The Freedom Act.
Yeah, the Freedom Act. You see how they rub it in your face, guys? You see how they take this dog crap and wipe it in your face and just say, here,
and they're
here's
like, this isn't dog crap.
Act. Yeah.
It's like revelation of the method.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Insane.
Okay, so that is the short version, the very short version of the official narrative. And this is what was repeated over and over and over and over, 24 hours a day for a very long time.
Yeah.
So raise your hand if you want to go through some of the discrepancies.
Okay, go.
All right. So I think personally, having been in some, like first responder trauma type situations, the eyewitness accounts of the people that were there, so the firefighters, the police, all of those people who were on duty working, they weren't just bystanders.
Right.
I think that their, eyewitness accounts of what happened should carry a lot more weight than they did, because they really didn't carry any weight. Right. So I think one of the biggest things for me was, it's really hard to find, and we'll link a documentary where he does have a lot of really good footage in there, but how many firefighters specifically, but firefighters, law enforcement, first responders, said it sounded like bombs went off. Yeah. There's one guy who's like, it sounded like boom, 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 boom. Like floor after floor after floor was just going off, which is totally not what it should have sounded like.
Yeah, because they're saying one plane flew into the tower, and what a lot of people heard was they saw a plane, but they heard an explosion, like a huge explosion. And,
like an earthquake magnitude.
And it shocked everybody. And that's, obviously before they came down, but they heard the first initial explosion, and then they saw the plane, and then there was another explosion. And then, like you said, boom, 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 all the way down when they collapsed. When
they did collapse.
So another thing was all of that.
The New York firefighters, they actually radioed in originally as bombs going off in the World Trade Center, specifically bombs on the first floor, the ground level.
It was in like a van or something like that.
From the top 15 floors, that was the only places affected, I think, by the actual plane, because it hit up near the top. There should be no explosion on the ground floor.
Right.
And we're talking about so this plane was going from Boston to California.
Correct.
Is that okay? And it was a 747? So big plane.
Might have been
737?
I think it was a 737.
Well, even worse.
Yeah.
Big plane, but not that big of a plane, right? To cause this. I mean, we all watched the towers fall over and over, like you said. It didn't look like a plane caused that. That's
well, and their whole argument, which actually, let's wait a second on that.
Okay, sorry.
Because we have so much. So there is 186 documented accounts of people saying that it sounded like bombs. So we're not talking just one or two people. 108. And these are people that were working that day. 118 of them were firefighters. The rest were police and other people that were working in the buildings nearby. Multiple people said it sounded like strings of explosions. Like that. It was incredible. All the news networks early on, except for Fox News, reported that it was bombs that went off and that the planes would not have been sufficient to bring the buildings down. So that's what all of the mainstream media, which there wasn't as many outlets as there is now, but there was still enough. All of them, except for Fox News, had reported that it was bombs originally, because nobody really knew at that point.
So Fox News was reporting
something else.
It was a hijacked plane.
Yes.
They were. We will get to that.
Yeah.
But yes. So here's a fun fact about that. Fox News mentioned the name Bin Laden within minutes of the second tower collapsing. So how in that amount of time could they have tracked down who it was? So then also by the end of that day, so just by the end of 9/11, by the end of the day, all of the networks had reverted to the narrative And somehow all of them knew that it was Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
By the end of the day. Now, let's remind you of the fight or flee or freeze. How did these people know that it was bin Laden that fast?
There's no way that you could know that it was. It's like, did he make a phone call? Did he say, hey, listen, here's the thing. That was me. So deal with it.
Catch me if you can.
Yeah. Catch me outside. How about that?
So here's another thing. When people were questioning, like, how could it have been bombs? That doesn't make any sense. It would have taken weeks to place that many bombs. Here's a fun fact. Turner Construction was working on the two towers. They were working on the building several months prior, doing renovations. This is a theme that you'll hear over and over. The Turner CEO of Turner Construction is really good family friends with the Bush family. Interesting.
What a shocking coincidence.
So the two main things in crime are what? Motive and opportunity. Okay, so who has more opportunity to be planting bombs and doing this stuff than a company that's hired by your best friend?
Right.
And if your best friend is the president and he has an agenda he wants you to push, you're going to push that agenda.
And his dad, I'm sure his dad was involved. You know, the former, head of the CIA.
I'll tell you what, though, this was one of the harder things for me. I'm not that we grew up in like a hugely political family. I wouldn't say my dad has been more interested in politics than my mom, but I wouldn't even really say that we were like a big, political family. But for us, like George Bush was awesome. Like he was a man of the people, right? He was a fumbling, bumbling, couldn't get through a speech to save his life. And I found it endearing. I thought he was a really like a breath of fresh air, like Obama bad, Bush good. That's kind of how we felt. Like,
and we had Clinton before Bush,
right? So and yes, and he was so just immoral, like just immoral in so many ways that it was like, oh, Bush, yeah. I mean, he seems like kind of an idiot, but he's kind of lovable, like. I don't know. That was a really hard thing for me.
Making fun of him and making all their funny, like, right. It's not rocket surgery.
Or the part on Transformers where they're like mocking him and they're like, "Hey, sweetheart, can you get me wrestle up me a couple of those ding dongs over there?"
Yeah.
He was just this dummy, But that was really hard for me to believe that the Bush family had so much to do with this. I don't know. I think I lost a lot of my hope in humanity.
Yeah,
with all of that.
You lose your childhood innocence when you realize that the people that put us in this state of terror. We talk about the Mockingbird Project. They've been doing this for a long time. They know exactly what they're doing. They're instilling fear in you, and what you're seeing on the television is what they're piping to you. I mean, we've already talked about in our podcast that the CIA would give them scripts to read. So how is it that every news station by the end of the day is talking war on terror, Al Qaeda, and all of those things? Bin Laden's name shouldn't have even been brought up in the first day. That doesn't even make any sense. Like, people are still in shock. We're still reeling.
About it now, it really doesn't make sense.
Right.
Yeah. And then we're talking about the Patriot Act already. We're already getting ready to go to war. Like, if your goal wasn't the war machine, then why are you so quick to turn around and start talking about war and taking away your citizens' rights? Like, that was literally the first thing on their minds. And Bush is saying one thing, but his shifty little eyes are doing something completely different. And if you're trained in knowing how to look for people when they lie, you'll see that he's lying. And they caught him in those lies. Same with Cheney, same with all of those guys. Condoleezza Rice, all these snakes, they caught them in hundreds, if not thousands of lies. Like, it's recorded. They caught them in lies, and they didn't do anything about it.
The hard part is that it's really hard if you type in, 9/11, you're going to get the official narrative. That's the first thing the first 10 pages I looked at was all the official narrative. It's really hard to find anything that goes against that. And it's also really hard to find any footage, any TV footage of any of this stuff going on. Because remember, this is 2001. People didn't have cell phones that they're filming their entire lives on. Everybody's filming something at every moment now. Like there's nothing that is not on film. But this was before any of that. So finding any of that footage is really difficult. So there's a couple documentaries. One is called Loose Change. What was the other one called?
Peace, War, 9/11.
Peace, War, 9/11. And so we'll put those in the show notes so that you can find them, because they actually do have audio, video, newspaper clippings. You can actually go back. Video. Yeah, you can actually go back. A good way to that I did some research was going back and finding just old podcasts that just kind of like the old ones that would read off the news. It was kind of like those fireside chats. They would just sit there and be like, okay, the news stories for today are blah, 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 blah. Because they didn't have unlimited internet to find whatever they wanted,
Right.
So if you go back and listen to some of those news stories, you can actually find some stuff, but it's really hard to find any information that falls outside of this main narrative.
Yeah.
So speaking of main narrative, the main reason that everybody is saying that the buildings collapsed was the jet fuel. It's got to be the jet fuel. How hot do you think the jet fuel burns? I have no idea. These buildings were made there. So there's two different things. There's a distinction here because some people go back and forth, but there is steel reinforced concrete beams and there is steel beams.
Yeah.
The World Trade Centers were steel beams. They were not steel reinforced concrete. They were full on steel beams. Not to mention, if you know anything about explosives, when you get that fireball at the beginning, when the plane hits the towers, you get this huge fireball. That's what burns the majority of your jet fuel. That's how you get that big plume of fire.
Yeah, so jet fuel is basically a vapor. It turns into a vapor as soon as it gets into the air, and then
when it's not contained any longer in a tank, what do they call it?
And its BTUs
dissipates.
Its BTUs are way high, meaning the fire sucks up the oxygen, or the fuel within it really fast. So it's just gone. As soon as you see that fireball, it's gone. And there's no way that the jet fuel from that plane or those planes had anything to do with melting this steel. And we're not just talking about a little bit of steel. I mean, engineers have poured over these buildings since. I mean, if you go to your local skyscraper, nobody knows much about it except for the people that built it, right? There's more people in the world that know about those two towers now than anybody knows about a building ever, probably, because everybody researched this building to figure out how in the heck they imploded like that. Like all of these engineers
fell into its own footprint. That was the whole thing. So the way that the one plane comes in, it kind of shaves off the corner, I guess, that kind of goes through the corner. So you would think, when you chop down a tree, you cut a little triangle, you cut a little wedge so that then it goes pink and then falls sideways. That's how you fall a tree. Literally, we live in the Pacific Northwest and we've seen it happen a million times. How do you fall a building? You would cut that corner out and then it would topple sideways, but it didn't.
Right.
It literally collapsed into its own footprint. Both of the buildings did.
Yeah.
Straight down.
All of the engineers that are looking at it are saying that doesn't make any sense. And then you get demolition experts that they had look at it, but they didn't tell them that this was 9/11. They just said, look at this building and see how it collapses. And then they say, what do you think happened there? And they're like, specifically with building 7, because we'll get into that in a second. But they're looking at them like, no, this was a controlled demolition. There's no way that this was That wasn't 9/11. That couldn't have been, because the planes hit it. Like, they're having their own cognitive dissonance in their mind, because they're like, there's no way that this was 9/11, because I heard the narrative was the planes. And there's no way that a plane would make a building fall like that. It just doesn't work. And so if you've got these engineers and these physicists and all these people saying that's not going to happen, I would believe them. I would believe them over the news. I'll tell you that.
Well, and the funny thing about trauma is when people have a traumatic experience, the first person they see when they wake up is typically burned into their memory. Like, they'll remember the face of the firefighter who pulled them out of the building. They'll remember the face of the paramedic who was giving them, CPR. There's certain things that are just burned into your memory. So when you're in that state of trauma, of extreme trauma, the first thing you hear is these news reports that it's Osama bin Laden and that it's a terrorist attack. That's what's going to stick in your memory. And everybody knows, I've said it a million times, nobody reads redactions. Nobody cares about redactions. They're not going to read them. They're going to put them on the 10th page of the newspaper. So even if they did come out 6 months later and say, oopsie, we made a mistake, this didn't actually happen like we said it did, but this is what happened. Nobody's reading that. Nobody's reading that. They're going to remember what happened at the moment of trauma.
Yep.
And within minutes of that second tower collapsing, it was bin Laden. And it was bin Laden, for me, for years and years and years and years and years.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't wake up to this, sadly.
Do you know how many people joined the military?
Oh, yeah.
Because of 9/11?
Yep.
I've heard so many stories and talked to so many people that I served with or that I have met over the years that have served that said, I joined because of 9/11. That's
believe
why.
it.
Because they were just mad.
Yeah, you had how many country singers that came out with songs?
Oh, that Toby Keith, we'll put a boot in your ass. It's the American way.
Yeah. Worley, what was his name?
Yeah. Daryl Worley.
I mean, people were ready to fight for our country.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Well, and America was united, right? We weren't talking about division. On September, a lot of people say the way that America was on September 12th was the way that we should always be. And I don't believe that, because the problem is we were banging the war gong over and over and over. We wanted blood and we wanted it now, and that as a Christian, I'm like, that's not me, but that's what I wanted then. Because I was young.
How fast did your base, you're at Camp Pendleton, how fast did your base get locked down when all of this happened?
Probably minutes.
Within minutes, you guys were locked down.
Within
and then you guys were
minutes.
We're planning for war. Wasn't that your next?
Yeah.
You were like, all right,
we were pulling out Constantine wire. We had, all the Humvees were coming out of the motor pool. You had people getting on guns. I mean, everybody was getting on gear. Nobody knew if there was going to be, because everything about an attack that we think about in the military is what's the secondary attack. If you have an ambush, you always have to be watching for a secondary or a third ambush or another attack coming from a different angle. And so we were constantly thinking, like, who knows? They might hit our base. We don't know. So everybody was doing that in America. Everybody was shutting down. Everybody was pulling out their guns. Everybody was ready to go to war. And we're just banging those war drums. All we want to know is who did it and who do we kill? And that's because that's the mindset that they were beating into our heads. The war on terror. How many times did you hear that over the last 20 years? The war on terror, the war on terror, the war on tonight, and the war on terror. This afternoon, and the war on terror. Breaking news, and the war on terror. All of those things, you're just like, this is absolute brainwash. Like, they are literally brainwashing you to think about key phrases, and those key phrases become your own personal mantra, where you're like, we got to get those dudes. We got to get those Hajis, and you start thinking that these people don't matter, and now these people, just because they have brown skin and they live over there, now they are the enemy, and the Marine Corps was real good at putting that in your mind, and I love the Marine Corps and I always will, but they're part of the war machine. for a reason. And if you can take that sword and wield it for good, that's great. And I love that about the Marine Corps, that they will fight to the death forever. But there is also this machine that is just raging on, and they would teach us, this is who we're fighting. These are our rules of engagement. This is this. This is this. And you knew, if I'm pulling the trigger on this person, it's because they're a bad guy. And then who is the bad guy? Like, after a while, you're looking at, here's a guy with a gun, but is he a bad guy, or is he just protecting his house, protecting his family? He sees tanks rolling down the street. He sees, all these people pointing guns everywhere, and they're could you imagine your street being invaded by military vehicles?
And people pulling you out of your homes, pulling your children out of your homes, to
kicking in your doors.
Yeah. I mean, I would defend my home. Like, no doubt about it. I would defend my home. Like, you most almost Americans can't blame these people. Like,
yeah. I mean, who are we really fighting? Because they were telling us over and over and over again who the enemy was, but they don't actually have any evidence. No. And that's one of the things that people have figured out over the years is, like, going into Iraq as an example. It was the weapons of mass destruction, right, that put us into Iraq. After 9/11, there was this big talk about Afghanistan, all of that. And then it went, like, super quick into, we have to invade Iraq. Well, I didn't think about it at the time, but that's pretty suspicious, right? They're talking about Osama bin Laden. They're saying he's in Afghanistan. And then not long after that, we're bombing Afghanistan. And then not long after that, they're saying we're going to war.
We're invading Iraq.
We're invading Iraq.
Yeah.
Why? What did they do? Did they bring our towers down? Was it them? No, it wasn't them. No. It wasn't them. That was Osama bin Laden. Okay, but why are we going? And all we ever got was weapons of mass destruction, right? That was the official narrative. WMDs. That's all they ever talked about. And then we got to the point where that's all we could hear in our heads again. WMDs, we got to go to war. We got to go to Iraq. We got to get Saddam, and they tell you the brown people are bad. If they wear the thing on their head, they're bad. Shoot in the face, and you're just like, okay. And you get indoctrinated. Now you're an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old person having to make life and death decisions because weapons of mass destruction? Like, what? I'm having a hard time telling who's good and who's bad. And they're not, like, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I was there and I can tell you the war was officially over in Iraq in, like, I think it was April of 2004. It was, like, officially over. But we just kept staying over there and doing more and doing more and doing more and doing more. Like, if you go to Wikipedia and you actually look at the length of the war, it was done in April of 2003, I believe, or 4, I mean. And it's just like, why are we still there? They didn't find any weapons of mass destruction. We found all kinds of weird stuff going on over there, but that's none of our business. We're not running the country for the guy. He's running his own country. What do we care? I mean, it comes down, and I know I'm ranting, but it comes down to, what is it that we went there for? And all you can tell me is weapons of mass destruction. But when I'm looking around at everything that's going on around me because I was there, it didn't make any sense. And as a man coming back from a wartime zone, thinking, what did I just do all that for? Why did I pull the trigger on those people? Why did I, what? Can somebody please explain this to my psyche? What it is that we were doing there? Because I didn't see it. These are
boys. We know that men's brains aren't fully formed until, mid 20s. These kids are 18, 19, 20-year-old boys going over. They're on foreign soil. They're away from their family. A lot of these kids, it's the first time they've ever been away from home. Some of them had never even been on planes. And you take them over to another country and indoctrinate them. And I mean, it's just awful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your rant. I love it. We have so much more information.
It's good. We can do multiple parts on this thing.
Yes. Whereas I think this is going to have to be more than one part. So the next thing that I would like to talk about, because I find this extremely comical, is here. I'm just going to read. This is sworn testimony that came out after. Quote, beginning with passports. 4 of the hijackers' passports have survived in whole or in part. 2 were recovered from the crash site of United Airlines Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. 1 belonged to a hijacker on American Flight 11, which hit the North Tower. So, how did passports survive when steel beams did not survive? So, mind you, the Pennsylvania crash site, there was no little to no debris that was ever found from a plane. Okay, there was like a couple of pieces that looked like maybe they came out of a airline or airport junkyard. Like there was a few pieces here and there, but there was no titanium engine turbines. There was nothing. There was no fuselage, which is supposed to withstand a whole lot of impact.
Mm-hmm.
There's plane crashes all the time where they can recover nearly all of the flight. I mean, everything that was on board, they can recover it, whether it's in pieces or not. Mm-hmm. So this crash site vaporized basically. When it made impact with the ground, the parts vaporized. However, there was an intact passport that was partially burned on like the corner, like
with a lighter.
Yeah, like somebody was like, "Oh crap."
We better make it
Here's
look
what
good.
I'd like to propose. Yeah. Why do we not make all of our buildings and all of our planes out of passport material?
We really should.
It's indestructible.
Yeah, it's like clearly. Teflon. Can't get through it.
My new wallpaper is going to be passport material.
Yeah, if we ever get bombed or anything, we'll be good. Yeah,
we'll be good. It's fine. Everybody come over to our house.
The fact that they can't find any airplane material. Like, are we serious?
And not even, so if you take an empty plane and you crash it, there's going to be a ton of debris. If you take a plane that has passengers on it, I mean, I know what my luggage looks like when I'm flying from the East Coast to the West Coast. I mean, come on, I'm taking a full suitcase, and half of Rick's suitcase is going to be full of my stuff.
And a carry-on.
And probably a carry-on. I'm just saying, like, everybody's got their luggage. There was not a pair of pants. There was not a bra. There was not a stuffed animal. There was nothing of human life found at this site. There was, and not to get morbid, but there was no body parts. There was no blood. There was no guts. There was no brain matter. There was nothing that was found in the Pennsylvania crash site at all, besides the passport. And a few other things, but
I'm telling you, it's the most lucky passport I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
But so then,
right. So then, for the one that hit the North Tower, there was, now talk about a stroke of luck. Okay, so these towers get planes flown into them. People are running around like full panic, right?
Right.
A passerby, looks down on the ground and sees a passport sitting on the ground. And so they're not like, run for your life.
Wait.
No, this is real life.
In all of the debris that we saw on the news, all the smoke, these people are covered in ash or something, like they find a passport.
So, yeah, so not only do they...
And then they pick it up?
It's probably just some random dude's passport, right? It's like they Gary from aisle 20.
And they're like, oh my gosh, a passport with a guy that looks like he could be a terrorist. I'm going to take this over.
Because they know at that point.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to take this over to this off-duty New York police detective, and I'm going to turn it into him before the towers even collapsed.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't even know that it was a terrorist attack at that point, because what was it? Within a few minutes of the second tower collapsing, it was bin Laden. Yeah. So this is before the first tower collapsed. And they find this passport, and it struck them as odd enough, even though the World Trade Center planes had just flown into it.
Right.
They found this bit of information odd enough to pick it up and take it to a retired detective who was standing nearby, just standing there.
What?
Off duty.
Interesting stroke of luck.
Crazy, right?
That it would be one of the terrorists. Like,
Crazy,
we
right?
found how many passports now of the terrorists?
So 2 were found in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And then 1 was found there by what did I say? By the North Tower.
Yep.
So then, let's see, the last
I wish I had a counter that was just like dinging with like passports in the corner. Like,
imagine it over here.
Bing. Yeah.
So the last passport was found. This was really funny too, because I hadn't heard this at all until I was like waist deep in this all week, guys. Okay. So I'm taking a vacation starting tomorrow. So the last passport was found in the luggage of one of the hijackers that somehow didn't make it onto the plane, which was flight 11.
Cool.
So I hate it when my luggage doesn't get to where I'm going. But if I'm a suicide bomber and this was my job, was to get on and hijack these planes and crash them into buildings. First of all, why am I packing luggage?
Why do you have luggage, sir?
Right.
How many box cutters can you bring in a
Aren't there
bag of
virgins
luggage?
waiting for them on the other side? They're not going to need any clothes for a while. Like,
Maybe
why are
he
you
didn't
packing
know
luggage?
that you can't take it with you.
Oh,
maybe he's never heard that
true.
sermon.
Yeah. So his luggage didn't make it onto the flight. And so that's where they found the 4th passport. It was in his luggage that was still at the airport.
Wow.
Because most people keep their passport in the bottom of the plane.
Right.
Because you're not going to need it if you're having a connecting flight or...
I didn't even think about that. But yeah.
I can't.
Yeah, it's the enormity.
Taking my passport out of it's like going from my hand to my bra to my purse, my bra to my hand to my purse.
Yes.
Like this is the route that it takes.
I checked my purse to make sure my passport was still in there.
Yes,
just gotta make sure. Okay.
You're not gonna put it in your checked baggage,
right?
Not even your carry-on, your checked baggage. Well, I don't know. Maybe the other guy's was in his carry-on. That's how it ended up on the ground outside of the North Tower. I don't know.
I mean, it's so lucky that they were able to identify themselves so easily.
Wow.
Because you know how much investigating that this would have caused? I mean, if we would have had to try to figure out who did this, I mean, that would tie up the New York Police Department and the FBI for a very long time, to do all this research, to find, pull video footage, all that stuff. We want to make sure not only did we get them, but we got them all, because damn these people, you know what I mean? That's the whole narrative, right? But no, we're not worried about a huge investigation to figure out who did it. We're not pulling security cameras. We're not doing all of these things. We're not interviewing people because those people are, quote, unreliable. Eyewitness testimony is, quote, unreliable. That's what they said. So,
which I will agree that a lot of times when you're in a traumatic situation, your memory can vary. However, the news footage of people being interviewed right after that's probably the most accurate information you're going to find, because they're remembering it in real time. They haven't stewed on it in a day. They haven't cried for 3 days and then they have to recount it.
They haven't talked to somebody else.
They haven't talked to anybody else. They haven't watched any news stories. These are people at ground zero that they were interviewing the day of, and not just anybody. These people are New York firefighters. Now, I mean, every small town's got a fire department, right? But a New York firefighter, they are trained specifically to fight fires in skyscrapers, in traffic, in very public areas. They have a different level of training than we have for our little podunk fire department here, right?
So they might tell you differently, but whatever.
They have a lot of training here, but it's insane. Like some of the training that they have to go through. Mm-hmm. So if these people are saying it sounds like charges going off, it sounds like bombs going off, boom, 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 I think I'm going to believe that. more than
Right.
I'm going to believe somebody else saying that it was jet fuel that melted the steel beams. Within 2 hours, mind you, there was I didn't write it down, but there was a building in like Hong Kong or something that was it was a huge skyscraper that was burning for days.
Yeah.
Like it was like 6 days it burned for, and it never collapsed. And it wasn't as reinforced as the World Trade Center was.
Yeah.
So these buildings were built to withstand fire. They had firewalls. They were built to not only withstand fire, but to seal off the rest of the building so that if there is a fire in one part of the building, it can be contained. I mean, that's what these buildings were designed, because obviously they're 110 stories tall.
Right.
They're designed to withstand hurricane force winds. Even the windows in the World Trade Center were reinforced with steel on the inside of in between the two panels of glass.
And they're not just regular panels of glass. I
No,
mean, these
it's
are
not
like
it's, yeah.
You can't just like accidentally trip and fall into it and fall out. Like these are very high-end windows. So, I mean, everything about the official narrative about how these buildings came down, all of the engineer testimony, all of these things, it doesn't jive. And that's not, I mean, this is just a piece of the puzzle, guys. Like we haven't even begun to get into all of the other stuff that's coming down the pike.
Is this a good place to stop for today, for part 1?
I think so.
I'm going to need a potty break soon.
I'm just saying we got the pregnant lady over here who's been guzzling water for the last hour and a half. I don't feel safe sitting next to her anymore.
She might pee on you.
I have diapers at home. I'll bring
That's TMI, but you got to do what you got to do. You know what I mean? Yes. You don't want to pee the bed.
I think it's smart. I'm just saying.
Guys, we had a good time putting all this together. We know it's traumatic. We know that there's a lot. Trust me, nobody knows how traumatic it is more than me, because I've been there, done that. And I know that maybe some of you are feeling this like betrayal by some of the things that we're saying. It's not a betrayal. Yeah. It's not. I promise you. This is if you give the time to just listen and reason within yourself with the gift of the brain that God gave you to reason and work this out. And also alongside that, the gift of the Holy Spirit that will come inside of you and illuminate these truths to you, because he is your comforter. He is the one that is going to teach you whatever you need to know. And so I want you guys to just do your best to get through the rest of this, because it only gets worse from here. I mean, the level of evil that these people, the terrorists, just as a spoiler alert, the terrorists are your government. And that's where we're going to end up with this. So stay tuned. We've got more to come, and we hope that you will join us on the next one. But for now, we are going to get out of here. Bethany's going to pee the bed, but we love you guys. We're so grateful for everything that you guys do, all of the likes and the shares and the subscribes and all of that. Any donations that have been coming our way, we appreciate all of them, and we're so thankful for you guys. So thanks again. And with that, we're going to get out of here. We are That's So Fringy Podcast, and we will see you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.